G'day legends, I hope you're having a fantastic day, and so far you're having a fantastic week. Now legends, this is probably the last day you'll see me for the rest of the week, so I hope you have a good ending to your week and weekend. I'm in this afternoon for my final round of the chemotherapy, as well as some fluids and some other bits and pieces as well to just keep me through the next couple of days. But I look forward to seeing you in the future, and we'll catch up on everything that we miss. Now, of course, as always, we do have a lot to go over. So, of course, we'll be looking at maps. And I've got a lot of maps to show today, a lot of information to push your way, as well as actually a lot of geolocations as well, and other areas that are mutually benefiting than other front lines as well. And we may separate them occasionally, but they are coming to a head and joining in some areas. We'll talk briefly about negotiations, what Europe is on about at the moment. But where we want to start is about losses. Killed in action, wounded in action, missing in action. And what you'll hear me say again and again is any figures where there is incentive and there's no repercussion to lie, then be very, very careful with any of this. There's a massive information war that is not only taken on board by people with no lives who do it just themselves, but there's also people with financial incentive to push information, especially on websites like this, as well as state-funded propaganda as well. I've got my eye on a few I think are receiving a lot of that. So let's have a look at this today. Now, typically what we get is these numbers thrown out by everything from the Ukrainian ministry to bloggers and whatever. But this time we have it on the other side, and we call BS where we see BS. Ukraine's military losses exposed, 1.7 million dead and missing. Apparently, Russian hackers have breached the Ukrainian General Staff's database. And this is what it is showing here, of 1.7 million killed or missing. And you can see how these have increased over time. And I have no doubt that losses will have increased over time. The hack was carried out apparently by Killnet, Palak Pro, UserSec, and Berezhiny. Now, apparently they have terabytes of sensitive material. And as we say, with any numbers, take it at best with a grain of salt or a truckload backing up of salt. They always are used for propaganda. And what I've said about propaganda in this war is by just pushing false information, no one ever receives much backlash. There's never any accountability. There's no repercussion. There's nothing. But of course, there's a lot of incentive on the other side. Now, these are most likely bullshit. The only way I could see that these numbers would actually be correct would be if it also took into account unaccounted for. Now, unaccounted for does not mean missing in action. What it could mean is those men unaccounted for who have maybe fled to Europe, and maybe we could get that figure to around that. Now, what I will say is I think Ukraine's losses are significantly higher than many are wanting to accept, and I think it's going to be a very rough truth coming for a lot of people. But like many hacks, whether it be from top secret submarine information through to this, I always question the authenticity, because it would be very easy in this day and age to make something like this up. And of course, we have seen people so emotionally involved, they will believe anything as long as it agrees with their narrative. Now, the best figures that we do have are from ualosses.org and Media Zone. UA losses is at 153,000, and Media Zone, recording Russian losses, is at recorded 121,000, but the probate, including then the difference between then the actual confirmed and then a degree to of the birth, deaths and marriages difference that we're seeing, is at 165k. So you see that these numbers are actually quite similar. Now, what these don't include is missing in action. And we know that figure could be massive, but these are far more reasonable than any other figures that we have got. And again, Occam's razor theory, if it seems more reasonable than the extremes, does 1 to 1.5 sound about right, or 1 to 11 KAA sound about right, okay? A little bit of this. And then we see this gentleman here. He's a political scientist at the University of Ottawa, Ivan Kachanovsky. Russian hackers' claims of 1.7 million troops killed or missing during the 3.5 years of war are fake and physically impossible. And he says it's missing any lack of reliable sources on other posts. My estimate, he says, of total Ukrainian force casualties is 160,000 to 200,000 killed, based on the nearly 155,000 killed or missing through UA losses. The number of wounded was 640 to 800,000, based on a 4-to-1 kill to death, killed to wounded ratio. I'll talk about that in a sec. He goes, Russian forces casualties during the last 3.5 years are estimated to be at least 125,000 killed, based on Media Zone, and 500,000 wounded, based on the 4-to-1 ratio. He also speaks about then the separatist formations around 25,000 killed, maybe 100,000 wounded. Now, what I will say is I think this 4-to-1, I think this is a very rough unknown. Now, yes, people say in modern war environments, but this is the first case of this. It's not like we have all these case studies behind the scenes to show this. What we do know is in a drone-heavy environment, medevac is seriously delayed and seriously costly. How many times have you seen a Ukrainian on a Russian drone target 4 guys with someone on a litter stretcher? How often do you see that? You see it a lot. How often do you hear about no one can leave an area for 12 hours until it is nighttime? So this 4-to-1, I think, is rough at best. I think that is likely a lot lower in some sectors. It would be very dependent where you are. And likely this would also be for your amputee ratio as well. The golden hour is a term used within NATO to try and get someone from being wounded to being in front of a surgeon to save life or limb. Now, we know that that is not only costly to get someone to a surgeon, but also very much delayed in a war like this. So those traditional amputee rates as well that you may have seen in Afghan Iraq, we can't just simply apply that here. I think your killed to wounded ratio will be higher, like more killed than we see the ratio typically, and same with amputees. From recoverable losses who become irrecoverable because of time, and a lot of that to do with drones. Now, as I said, there's a large margin in all of these areas. The ratio will change massively. Imagine right now that you lose a leg in Pokrovsk with the drones, everything happening around here. We heard of this in Avdiivka, guys being left for 12 hours and guys being left when there was a final withdrawal, left for the Russians to, well, left with like their casualty handover being like, this is what's wrong with him, a card on their chest or whatever occurred. That's basically what we're hearing, and had to leave guys behind. You lose a leg in Pokrovsk right now, you are far more unlikely to get out within a time frame than if you're in Vesely or Ivanivka. Although it's the same time front, or same distance from the front line, you get what I mean about these sectors. But of course, people will push back and go, well, Russia has been on the offensive. And yes, typically that would produce higher casualties, and it produces longer casualty evacuation chains in logistics as well. That is all correct. But it's not that simple. Russia has also held the short, medium and long-range artillery superiority for years, and typically artillery is the cause of most casualties. So this is the thing, is you get this balancing of you're going to have more on offensive typically, but also have this superiority on artillery, and you also these envelopments that are just getting smashed from 3 sides like Pokrovsk or Konstantinivka or Kupiansk or Bakhmut or Avdiivka. We can keep going on those areas. So this is where I say these casualty figures are probably very close to each other when we take in the entirety of the war. The point that I'm trying to make is not who has more or who has less casualties. It's catastrophic either way. And post-war attrition of guys with their wounds, both mental and physical, is going to be horrible in these demographic crises that both Ukraine and Russia have. But that this is attritional war. What counts is who can sustain these losses, who can replace these losses for longer. And with any numbers that have a shred of credibility, any numbers with a shred of credibility from UA losses or from then media zone, what we see, Ukraine is nowhere near the 3 or 4 to 1 needed just to break even. And we've said that 3 to 4 1 to break even is based on population. When we base on recruitment and morale, it's probably far higher than this. So this goes into using any figure with any amount of credibility, using the metric as far as losses on the battlefield, that we do see that the attritional war and the outcomes that may become are not positive for where maybe the media will sprout off their own nonsense. Now let's talk about negotiations. Donald Tusk, the Prime Minister of Poland, has said this. Budapest. Of course, people are suggesting that Budapest be where the trilateral meeting between Trump, Zelensky and Putin is held. In 1994, Ukraine already got assurances of territorial integrity from the US, Russia and UK in Budapest. Maybe I'm superstitious, but this time we'll try and find another place. We know how that ended up. Now, it's true. I don't think Hungary is a good place for this. These talks have to be held outside of parties or institutions that are directly involved. I don't care what Hungary says. They're part of the EU, they're part of NATO. So to suggest Moscow is as ridiculous to suggest as Kiev. Okay? The US and Europe also no-goes for the same reasons. The only options, as far as I see it, is Saudi, China, India. Probably India the most, but we know how they like to pull back a little bit from that international affairs. So again, that's the only options that I'd really see as available. But everyone's speaking of, and the Italian leader, she's speaking of this today, around the Article 5-like or de facto NATO security guarantees. This is just not going to fly with both sides. Okay, Russia may have said that with this war is blah, 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 to not have NATO expansion. It's not that they mean NATO, just the wording. They mean then Western involvement militarily moving forward. That's what it's meant. Just because you name it something else, you can name it Big Dick Willie player fucking security guarantees, they're going to have the same fucking problem. The language is not the problem here, you fucking spastics. Like, it just doesn't make sense. And same for on the Ukrainian side. I'd be saying no. The whole reason we want NATO is it's an entire institution of many states who have bought into these guarantees. You have this Article 5-like. No, it just isn't. It's not going to have that cementing that those then articles already have, and already people question as well. So that's why I believe a lot of this is political theatre to try and get a ceasefire and show the US that Ukraine is willing to come to some compromise and work within them, and political theatre on the Russian side to show that they're being reasonable to Trump, but why I ultimately believe this will be settled on the battlefield. Now, let's have a look at the maps. Of course, here's Ukraine, the center of screen, the capital of Kyiv. Red areas occupied since 22, purple since 2014, and the red check ground that Russia has made over the past 24 hours. Let's have a look at what is moving on the map and where there are some changes. Now, the first area I want to come into is this Pokrovsk Eastern area. Now, you're probably sick of me talking about this, but it's still unclear exactly what is going on, because we have a little bit of footage today which was released today, but I suspect that it is older. So if we overlay this, it's just near Petrivka. Likely old, but it did come out today, some 7 kilometres behind the line. Just up in this sector, Petrivka right here, is we do see Ukrainian drones dropping, then mines on Russian positions. So it did get far further than was ever shown on these maps, and it's still showing on these maps. Again, if that footage is new, there may be forces still far beyond to the north of Zoloty Kolodiaz, but I suspect it is older. But we are starting to get some amount of footage coming through. Remember, to the south of Kucherev Yar, Playfarer yesterday spoke about POWs in here, that he released a video of prisoners. He says that if it was taken exactly in that forest, sources Dobropilia, further on he confirmed that apparently, yes, this is from that forest area where those Russians were supposedly surrounded. Now, I try not to show POWs on this. There are laws actually protecting POWs, but obviously no one has given a single shit about any of that. The footage clearly shows 3, maybe a 4th, but not the, quote, thousands that many COPE accounts spoke of. There were accounts saying that there were thousands of Russians in this small tree line to the south of Zoloty Kolodiyaz. Now, use your brains. But that there were some prisoners taken in there, and it did seem it was this tree line just down here from, from Zoloty Kolodiyaz, and a tree line in between Kutujiv Yar and that area too. I believe it may have been that tree line. Just wait out on that. But let's have a look and see, because AMK is saying that there's been some further pushing back in these sectors. Now, what he's showing is the Russians are pushing out around Kutujiv Yar again and towards Rubizhne. They resumed assault operations and begun recapturing lost positions. After successful Ukrainian counterattacks, Russian forces were able to regroup and hold their ground in and around Kutujiv Yar. They began advancing 2 directions outward from the village. So as you can see here, Kutujiv Yar, and pushing out, not the cutoff that is showing in here. The longer these cutoff shows like this, the more and more unlikely I am to believe it. But don't worry, because the island boys of Kindra Shivkia are still out in that sector. So again, wait out on this. But then to the east of here, we have Popov Yar, Poltavka, Shakhovka areas you'll need to be familiar with. And Suryak shows that this building of the flank on the southwest of Konstantinivka, but also part of this entire Pokrovsk eastern area, the Russian forces advanced towards Sofivka, further outflanking the stronghold village of Shakhovka, where they will gain high ground and then push downhill as well. So outflanking Shakhovka, and it's not only AMK speaking about this, Thorkill as well speaks about this in this map here. You can see, of course, where these areas are. That offensive actions aimed at dislodging Ukrainian units from the Vodorovivka Shakhovka area being carried out by the 39th Rifle Brigade. The Russians are sparing no resources to capture it. Russian aircraft have dropped over 30 FABs on Ukrainian positions in the wooded strips at its summit in this hill. In practice, force Ukrainians to abandon the Vodorovivka Shakhovka area and retreat northward to Pavlivka area. So into downhill and then pull out to the north. So there's still a lot going on around here. And still, the amount of media blackout here makes me suspicious as well. Let's push just to the north of here, and we have the Konstantinivka Toretsk Chasiv Yar pocket that has been developed and is very deep. If we went from the extremes of where this would meet across here, we do have that at the deepest point, it is around 27 kilometres wide. Now, Konstantinivka, we had a lot of information coming out that was unverified of DRGs moving up into Konstantinivka. A Russian page says today, south of the highway, there was no breakthrough or entry into Konstantinivka. They, by DRGs, entered through the dashes north of the highway and then left. At the moment, the situation looks like this in a screenshot. Our artillery is working on the dashes. So that there was some teams move down the highway into here, pull out, but now the artillery is working on the eastern extremes of these areas, as you would, as most makes sense in here. Now, we do have a fair few areas in here. So we have, of course, Katerinivka, where this pocket has developed in here, and there's only a very small way in and out of here. That's too long. It's around under 3 kilometres at very, very best in here, and being completely resupplied by drones as I hear it. We see then this Konstantinivka direction, towards then the forested area, and you can see where Katerinivka is and closing up across some of these roads as well. So you can see where these 2 roads lead in, that between basically here and here is closing up according to Mr. AMK mapping. We'll push just to the north of here. You see Delivkia all the way up to Chasiv Yar. So we look on the AMK, the Konstantinivka direction. Russian forces continue to advance and have completed the capture of the Seversky Donetsk line. So what we're looking for is really Bila Hira in here to line this up, and Predechny as well. So we zoom in, you can see Bila Hira pop up as well as the Pochke Predechny. So let's have a look on this. So basically filling in this entire sector through here. Again, over the past months, we have had then limited geolocations, but some right in this sector. So he's saying that is closing up, which is closing and squeezing on the Konstantinivka direction. Then we have Chasiv Yar, which of course is the northeastern side of this, and AMK showing this here. So pushing further to the west, and of course between Maysky, Harovkia and the canal, making some areas in there, pretty much shown by this map as well. Now, where we'll push from now up into Seversk. Of course, this area has been holding for a very long time, but over the past months, we have seen this move, and likely this looks a lot worse than this map is actually showing. What we can see today is that Russian confirmation out to Dorshki, but you can also see where these reservoirs run from Yampolivka right down to here, and the grey zone and the danger in here too. But let's have a look at where Mr. Playfra has pushed back on some of this as well. That in some areas it's worse, some areas it's better, and that it is vastly different. So he shows Serebryanka and where the front line he is saying is sitting right on the outskirts of this, but how Horyovka is completely coming under control. But also what he states is the depth of where Ukraine still control in this Kremenar forest. And if you have a look, see where this waterway then loops around the old mushroom tip waterway right up in here. And he says that this is a massive danger because back from any area like Yampil that is going to support in here can be up to 20 kilometers deep. So if we go from here to right out in here, we're talking 17 kilometers at best. And you can get an idea of how difficult this situation would be. So that there is further pushing, but the Ukrainians still hold, as he says, a lot more. Deep State drawing the situation as different and incorrect parts. Ukrainian control further east of what Deep State shows, as we did. Easternmost Ukrainian positions are 20 kilometers. Herovkia is under Russian control. What's Serebryanka, even if under Russian fire control, is a big grey zone. So saying that Serebryanka may be under fire control, but is at this point grey zone at the moment. Russians are trying to cut off the Ukrainians with exactly 2 attack vectors in the Serebryansky forest, as well as using boats to reach Serebryanka through the river, but are not having significant successes. So try to move down on different vectors and cut off Ukraine through these forests. These areas have moved reasonably quickly, well, very quickly actually, given how slow and how there was no movement in here for a very, very long time. And this is part of the Seversk North, but also this southern push coming around that will ultimately try and reach Liman for Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. And we can see, we often call this the turny bulge that is coming out of here. So let's have a look at some geolocations in here too. So what we see where this area is, but south of Zatochnaya, we do see that there was a then Ukrainian tank countering a Russian DRG element here too. So what we see from this footage, and it's not super clear, but we do see a Ukrainian armoured vehicle appearing like a tank, supposedly Russian forces in these areas, and then we do see tank firing on these areas. They said it was eliminated. It was just where my cursor is at the moment. Again, it's hard to know from any footage because how many times do we see that this is being completely eliminated, completely pushed back, then the next day we do see ground made. That may have been eliminated, but these simultaneous and successive operations at cost to gain areas as well. So keep an eye around there. And we've said that this area, or this Liman front, Oskil, Turney, whatever you want to call it, is a very, very dangerous area. And it hasn't moved for years, and it is currently moving. The last area we're going to come down into is Velika Novosilka, where of course we see the most amount of changes on the Deep State map today. Vilna, Poli, Malivkia, and right out to the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast as well. Again, this grey zone in here, highly, highly suspicious that it would look like that in the type of war that this is. But just to the north of here, we have Horokove, and AMK mapping here saying that over the past month, Ukrainian forces have slowly begun pushing back the Russian forces north and northwest of Horokove. So we do see some green in here, just north, northwest, some areas in here being pushed back at the moment. And I do have another geolocation for you today, but it may be a little bit difficult to find because the labeling is poor. Near Komi Shuvavska in here. Apologies for that. There is a very small village that sits down in here. I can't read it here. It's Novu something. Sits down in here, and what we do see is that Russian forces have raised a flag there claiming the capture of that. Again, we've seen a lot of flags go up in these areas that have been relatively quickly pushed back. So just, I think the grey zone around here should be massive, as well as grey zone around Pokrovsk area should be very large, but wait out on any further confirmations. So I think that is all that we have. Now, Legends, I'm not going to see you for a couple of days. I struggled my way through this, but I hope you will have a fantastic next couple of days. fantastic weekend, and I'll see you, and hopefully I'm feeling a lot better. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.